How did this pilot become this pilot? We're going to tell you in a special episode of Celebrating Aviation with Mike Mashat. This channel is proud to bring you the story of Lieutenant Colonel FITZ Fulton, one of the world's greatest experimental test pilots. Before we dive into the story, let's look at some career highlights. FITZ flew 235 different types of aircraft, logged 16,000 hours of flight time, flew in the Berlin airlift, the Korean War, and spent 23 years at Edwards Air Force Base as a U.S. Air Force test pilot and 20 years as a chief NASA test pilot. Here we see FITZ and his wife Irma with General Jimmy Doolittle at a Society of Experimental Test Pilots symposium in Los Angeles. FITZ was born June 6, 1925 in Blakely, Georgia, 2 years before Lindbergh made his solo flight from New York to Paris. FITZ soloed a Piper J3 Cub at age 17 and knew he was headed for a career in aviation. After high school, he attended what is now Auburn University and qualified for the Army Cadet program. He was enlisted into the U.S. Army as a private on his 18th birthday in 1943. He entered primary flight training in the Boeing Stearman PT-17, basic training in the BT-13 Vultee vibrator, advanced training in the multi-engine Beechcraft AT-10, and initial combat training in the B-24 and B-29. But World War II ended in August 1945, and FITZ was now a commissioned officer and a fully qualified pilot. He received his first command of the Douglas C-54 Skymaster. Fulton was an eyewitness to history, flying C-54s, supporting atom bomb testing in Kwajalein Island in the Pacific in 1946. His 320th Troop Carrier Squadron was named Green Hornet Airlines, flying worldwide cargo missions in 1946 and 1947. In September 1948, he flew in the historic Berlin airlift. Returning stateside, FITZ was assigned to Eglin Air Force Base, Florida, but relocated to Muroc Flight Test Center in California, shown here, for its dry desert climate to help with his daughter's asthma. He was assigned flying the now U.S. Air Force bombers. In 1951, he was sent to Korea, flying the Douglas A-26 Invader. But a year later, he returned to Edwards and entered the U.S. Air Force Test Pilot School, graduating with honors. Here we see the original South Base with 3 TPS airplanes overflying the tower. From left, the Lockheed P-80, the North American B-25, and the North American T-28. In 1956, Edwards' main base, now called the Super Base, opened, and it was the heyday of flight test. Here we see hangar 1600, still there today, but notice that all of the latest and greatest Air Force hardware is on this hangar floor. We see the Douglas C-133 Cargo Master, the Boeing B-47 Stratojet, Convair F-102 Delta Dagger, and all the way in the back at upper left, a Sikorsky CH-37 Mojave helicopter, all of which FITZ flew at Edwards. But his main focus was bombers. And let's take a look at the airplanes that he flew, bombers by the numbers. The B-36, 43, 45, 47, 50, 51, 52, 57, 58, 60, 66, and 70. Quite a career. Now, these are the X-planes, a family of exotic research aircraft designed to probe the unknown. And FITZ did not fly these airplanes, but he played a pivotal role in their success. These two in particular, the Douglas Skyrocket at left and the Bell X-2 at right, had to be air-launched from a bomber. And this is where FITZ rose to the occasion, earning a reputation as a chief mothership pilot. He started with the original generation Bell X-1, the advanced Bell X-1A at B, the Bell X-2, and take a look at this. There's not a lot of ground clearance between the X-2 and the landing gear there. And notice this is a perfect crosswind landing on a captive flight, bringing the X-2 to Edwards. FITZ made it look easy. Here he is in the cockpit of the EB-50. And into the jet age, FITZ transitioned to the B-52, launching the rocket-powered X-15. Here he is with his friend Neil Armstrong. Armstrong made 7 flights in the X-15, and as Milt Thompson always liked to say, later went on to other things in the space program. There were 2 NB-52 motherships. This is Balls 3, named the High and Mighty one, taking off on runway 04. And Balls 8, an NB-52B, was flown all the way to the end of the program, making the 199th and final flight in the X-15 program. This is FITZ executing the famed mothership salute. Now, what this is all about is that the X-15 flights covered the 250 to 300 mile distance from the launching site in Nevada back to Edwards in all of 6 to 8 minutes on a speed run and 8 to 10 minutes on an altitude flight. The B-52, however, took the better part of an hour. And so when FITZ returned to base, he would always give a low pass over the X-15 on the lake bed in salute to the program. But there were other aircraft involved in the X-15 flights. FITZ flew the C-130 seen here, and these aircraft supported the missions by flying to the emergency lakebed sites that dotted the path of the X-15. In the event of an emergency, these were available for the X-15 to make an emergency landing if he couldn't make it back to Edwards. And I mention this because when I did the mural in the Air Force Flight Test Center Museum in 2000, FITZ came in the early stages of the project and noticed that I had the rescue helicopter way in the background. And in his humble manner, he said, "Mike, I'd like to request that you make the helicopter larger and put it up front in tribute to the rescue boys," as he put it. These were the guys that took that helicopter a day or 2 earlier and went up to those lake beds and camped out and were always ready in case of an emergency. Here we see the H-21 with the X-15 on the lake bed. But it was FITZ's suggestion that actually changed my mural, and I was very proud to do it. When I asked FITZ what his favorite airplane was in his entire career, without hesitation, he said the Convair B-58 Hustler, the world's first Mach 2 bomber. FITZ was involved in the flight test program at Edwards. He flew the escape capsule tests both on the ground and in the air, and then paid special attention to the landing gear problems. There were a number of problems with the B-58 gear. The small tires were inflated with pure nitrogen at 300 PSI, and at the exceedingly high speeds of takeoff and landing, many times they ruptured and created all sorts of problems. Here's one of several emergency landings that FITZ had to make with ruptured tires. And they would foam the runway and FITZ would bring it in. And kind of ruined your day when the landing gear looked like this. You can see the escape ropes up there at on the fuselage for the crew to slide down before the fire trucks got to the airplane. But those problems were solved, and FITZ was very proud of being a part of the solution. And the B-58 went on to a relatively successful career with the Strategic Air Command. In September of 1962, FITZ boarded an airplane and made the world's payload to altitude record that still stands to this day. He zoom climbed the B-58 to 85,360 feet, carrying an 11,000-pound payload. That airplane was this one, 581015. And you notice if you look under the cockpit windows there, there's a name, and the name is Ginger. This airplane was named for FITZ's older daughter, seen here at right in a classic family portrait taken at base housing. That's Ginger, Irma, son Jim, FITZ, and daughter Nancy in the photo. Here's Ginger admiring her namesake with Dad on the ladder. Son Jim got to attend the rollout of the second XB-70 at Palmdale. And daughter Nancy got to not only see the YF-12 Blackbird, but sit in the cockpit right after this photo was taken. FITZ had friendships with a number of British test pilots, and there were some interesting formations over Edwards as a result of that. Here we see the Avro Vulcan and the Boeing B-52H in a unique flight test color scheme. And then this was my first project with FITZ. This is a painting called Dance of the Valkyrie, commemorating his flight of April 8th, 1966, where he made the first flight to the design speed, achieving Mach 3.07 at 73,000 feet. His co-pilot that flight was North American's pilot, Al White. The Air Force project pilots were Colonel Joe Cotton at left and FITZ at right. And FITZ retired from his Air Force career in July 1966 by basically changing his flight suit to NASA and hiring in at the Dryden Flight Research Center. Here's FITZ with co-pilot Don Malik, still flying the B-70. It was quite an airplane and a highlight of FITZ's career. He made a number of flights for NASA, studying sonic boom propagation and high-speed flight in airplanes of this size. The B-70 was the largest aircraft ever to fly at 3 times the speed of sound. He also got to fly the British Airways Concorde. The Convair 990 was an interesting airplane for NASA. NASA had 4 of them, this one being the 4th and final. This was used in testing the space shuttle landing gear and developing better brakes for the space shuttle. FITZ also flew the B-52 mothership for NASA, launching the lifting bodies. These were the precursor of the space shuttle. This is the Northrop M2 F2 seen here on the pylon. But the space shuttle first flew in 1977, not in orbit, however. They made 5 ALT, or approach and landing test flights, proving that the shuttle was airworthy before they would commit it to orbit. And FITZ is probably best known for flying this airplane, the 747 SCA, or Shuttle Carrier Aircraft, a modified 747-100 previously flown by American Airlines. Here we see the dynamic duo, the Shuttle Enterprise, which was never intended to be launched into orbit. This was strictly a test vehicle. You notice the white tail cone, which was a fairing to cover the rocket exhaust bells. And the first 3 flights were flown in this configuration. The 4th ALT flight was flown by Joe Engle and Dick Truly with the fairing removed. And this was probably the diciest of the flights because they really didn't know what was going to happen with the airflow over the tail of the 747. And this became my second project with FITZ and Joe Engle. This is Free Enterprise, showing the launch of Free Flight 4 in 1977. To give you an idea of the dynamics of this flight, the shuttle was launched from the 747 at 23,500 feet and reached the lake bed in 2 minutes, 15 seconds. FITZ was also involved in the ferry flights carrying the shuttle back to Kennedy Space Center from Edwards, where they had landed and were flown back to Florida for relaunch. FITZ told me that one of his proudest moments in his career was flying this 747 and shuttle combination over the Eiffel Tower in France during the Paris Air Show in 1983. Although FITZ never considered himself a fighter pilot per se, he always smilingly mentioned that he flew single cockpit airplanes like the NASA F-104, the NASA YF-12, his fastest aircraft at Mach 3.2, and even unique experimental airplanes like the AD-1 oblique wing test vehicle. He retired from NASA in July 1986 and was hired by Burt Rutan's Scaled Composites in nearby Mojave, California. He made the first flights of the Advanced Technology Tactical Transport seen here and the Model 143 Triumph jet. FITZ retired from his 46-year aviation career in 1989. Let's look at the awards and commendations acquired in this amazing career. FITZ won the Harmon Trophy, the Society of Experimental Test Pilot Ivan C. Kinchlow Award. He was a member of the National Aviation Hall of Fame and inducted into the California, Alabama, and Georgia Aviation Halls of Fame as well, the Aerospace Walk of Honor in Palmdale, California. And he became the first person to receive the Distinguished Alumnus Award from the Air Force Test Pilot School. Aviation Week magazine awarded him a Lifetime Achievement, and he was also awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross Exceptional Service Medal and U.S. Air Force Air Medal. Well, it was quite a journey from that rural town in Georgia to the ramp here at Edwards, and FITZ will always be known as father of the motherships. FITZ and Irma moved from Palmdale, California to a beautiful retirement community near Los Angeles, where my wife and I enjoyed many wonderful visits over the years. As this video is being made, Irma is about to celebrate her 100th birthday. FITZ passed away from Parkinson's disease, identified as an occupational hazard for his generation of test pilots, on February 4th, 2015. Upon learning the sad news, I remember thinking that in aviation, sometimes things happen that are just unexplainable. Here's FITZ climbing the boarding stairs for the final flight of the XB-70, delivering the iconic aircraft to its new home at the Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio. The date of this final flight in 1969 was February 4th. Special thanks to Irma Fulton for graciously allowing us to bring this story to you, to Ginger, Jim, and Nancy Fulton for their friendship and support over the years, to Tony Landis and the Air Force Flight Test Center History Office for the incredible images that you saw in this program. So thank you for celebrating aviation with Mike Machat. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and until next time, take care.